Welcome to Intersect, where church meets culture. My name is Josh Desch. I am the lead pastor at Northeast Presbyterian Church, and I am joined, as always, by my better half, the very athletic Betsy.
Wow, athletic. Thank you.
Hey, you did run a marathon. That's more than most people can. It's more than I can say.
I am good at things that happen within the walls of a gym. Once it gets onto a field.
Yeah. I realize
Not
this.
so much.
There's sort of hand-eye athletes.
Yes.
That, the ball, sports, soccer, all that's tennis, all that
Right.
kind of stuff. And then there's other kinds of, you're more of the dancing,
That's
running
so true.
type.
So true. Yeah, so true.
Hey, we got a good one for you, folks. Today's episode of Intersect is going to be a book review. And Betsy, I can't wait to hear about this book that you read. This is the title of the book, Take Back the Game, How Money and Mania Are Ruining Kids' Sports and Why It Matters by Linda Flanagan, was written in 2022.
Yeah, it's a really good book. Linda Flanagan, just to give a little bit of her background as the author, she's a journalist, and she sounds like quite an athlete herself, quite accomplished, but she was also a cross-country and track coach.
Yeah.
So she brings that perspective.
So we are going to talk about sports and kids. Can you believe it? We are going there, Betsy.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of a big deal.
Linda's going there. We're following her.
That's right. We're just behind Linda.
Into the hornet's nest.
Right.
But I mean, come on. If you have kids in America today, if sports is not something that is a big deal in your home, I mean, you're doing something really unique. Because
Right.
sports is a huge thing. We've got 4 kids. They play sports. We'll talk about that later. But let's just jump right into the topic. What's changed about youth sports? People have always played sports. George Washington is probably running around catching a pine cone or something. I don't know, chopping cherry trees down. So what's changed now from those days to now?
Well, so Linda Flanagan, she's very, I appreciate as an author, she's very quick to criticize herself, which is kind of nice. So she throws herself right into the mix with everybody else. So she starts with a great story. She tells about when she had her son at a basketball game. And her son, she has 3 kids, but one of her sons in particular was a very talented athlete as a kid. And so she talks about taking him to a basketball game where he did pretty well. He was one of the better kids on the team. And she noticed, they came home from the game and she was just kind of like, they were all kind of in this glow of like, he had dominated the game, the team had won, they all felt really good about his performance, her included as the mom. And so she started talking about, she was reflecting on how she felt and then in that moment, and then reflecting on it later, comparing to how she feels like her parents would have felt at the same thing. So this is what she says. I recalled how my parents had engaged with my 4 siblings and me when I was growing up. While they had encouraged our athletic pursuits, carting us to practice and attending games when they could, they hadn't attached their psyches to our performance. Their work, friendships, and other adult responsibilities took precedence. Our games were mindless diversions and an afterthought to their fuller and more complicated lives. But their indifference didn't feel like a deficit of love. Rather, it signaled that my games were my endeavor and that their affection for me, for all my siblings, was independent of what we achieved in sports. But something had changed. I couldn't figure out why her son, Paul's athleticism seemed to matter so much to me, and why kids' sports animated everyone in my orbit. But I felt that pull from his earliest days. And by the look of the fields around town, all of them cluttered with children dressed in uniforms and ready to play, other parents felt that pull too. So she's saying, to her, I'm not sure exactly how old she is. She looks to be somewhere middle-aged, but she's saying that to her, she's seeing how the youth sports culture has changed from how her parents perceived it to how she perceived it.
How it's become all-encompassing, and then also how much parents are invested in our kids' success at sports.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we're just going to jump into this book. Very good book, very provocative for anyone who is involved, who has kids involved in sports or grandkids or anything, or you're a coach maybe.
You're alive.
You're alive.
And you live in America.
So the first part of the book, she talks about how the game has changed when we weren't looking.
Okay.
So the first thing she brings up is money. So Josh, she has a stat in this book that blew my mind. She says in 2019, the youth sports industry was valued at an estimated $19.2 billion, which was an increase of more than 90% since 2010. That's the craziest part.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
And I would guess that the increase from 2000 to 2010 would be, I would guess this kind of dramatic increase has been going on for a long time. At least for maybe 20 years. I'm trying to think about when travel became a really big thing.
Right.
But yeah, that's a lot. That's a ton of money, and that's a big increase.
Right. So she kind of pulled apart where some of this money is that she's talking about. So there's obviously the sports brands, right? All of the major sports brands, those are involved in, all different kinds of branding, in the equipment that teams use and that parents buy. And so there's the sports brands. That's part of the money that
sure.
is in
Nike,
sports.
Puma, Adidas, Reebok.
Under Armour.
You got
all of it. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And then there's the sports tourism. So as she talks about how as travel club teams got more and more popular, there became more and more of an industry around that called sports tourism. So did you know, Josh, that at Disney there's a complex called the Wide World of Sports in Orlando?
Had no idea. Tell me more.
Yeah. So that was built, I believe she said, in the late 90s. So companies realized that parents were willing to spend money on kids' sports. And, from a parent's perspective, as she said, it was more travel would mean that more eyes are seeing their children, with the potential for college coaches or that kind of thing. So that's kind of how that started.
And the venues love it because that's all hotel rooms. Mm-hmm. They're filling up with hotel rooms, and the restaurants love it too,
right.
I would think. Yeah.
Right, yep. So yeah, she talked about sports brands, sports tourism, and then the selling of specialization. So what she means by specialization is kids picking a certain sport and doing that exclusively at younger and younger ages. So she's saying that this has become something more and more common over the last several years. So this is a quote: "Young kids pick one sport and concentrate solely on it. They play to win, practice to sharpen a marketable skill, and work to woo a college coach." So in that selling of specialization, you've got coaches, you've got conditioning coaches, you've got different camps and different ways that you can get better at your sport. And, all of that comes at a price tag.
Sure.
So,
yep.
So that's one way she says that the game has changed when we weren't looking.
Yeah. And specialization makes sense when you think about everything getting more competitive. Mm-hmm. As things get more competitive, specialization becomes more important, at least according to the logic, to be able to perform at a higher level, right?
Right, to be able to keep up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the second thing she talks about is the stakes, how the stakes of college sports or of kids sports have gotten much bigger. And she talks about the status that comes from it.
Yeah. This
so
is big.
I loved this quote. She is talking about her own experience having a child who was particularly gifted. She says, "It wasn't long before I started noticing how athletic ability, even among elementary school kids, conferred prestige. For though it goes unsaid, physically gifted children do indeed gain status, as do the humble parents who brought them into the world." That was funny.
That is funny. Bets, I can remember when I was in elementary school, and I don't have a ton of memories from this period of my life, but I can remember field day when I was like fourth, fifth grade.
Field day was the best.
It was it was absolutely it was the greatest.
It was.
But I can remember that, being a very skinny person and being pretty athletic, I was fast, but I wasn't the fastest. There was 4 or 5 kids that were faster than me. And I still remember they were the top of the totem pole. They were the big deal. And then, of course, as I went into high school, absolutely the best football players and everything.
Yeah.
They were miles ahead of everybody socially.
Right.
Yeah.
This is nothing new.
No.
Right?
Yeah, this has been going on forever.
This has always been the case. I mean, think about all the movies that are based on the premise of, the jocks and the nerds.
yeah.
Like that's every
athletes have always
teenage
been
movie.
at the top.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's not new. Maybe what she's saying is that's accelerated to some degree.
Sure.
But she also talks about how children have become the wellspring of parental satisfaction, and that I don't think that's new at all in any kind of way. But she's saying that parents are drawing that satisfaction out of their kids' athletic performance, maybe in a way that they didn't used to. And I think she would say the root of that, I'm sure there's a lot of different roots, but parents feel a lot of economic anxiety, right? Like kids need a marketable skill to be able to get ahead.
Yeah, yeah. Can I just share a quick story about, so Bets, you and I, we allowed one of our kids to try out for a travel sports team, travel soccer team. One of our daughters, pretty good at soccer. So I take her, it's like a 3-day event. And I have all these ideas because I don't know, I've never done this before, but I start talking to the parents and I learned 2 incredibly interesting facts in talking with the parents. Number one is I learned that for this particular travel sports team, every kid makes it, which I had no idea. I thought you actually, if you make it, that's a big deal.
Right,
that's
right.
special. That shows maybe you really are good enough to play in college. But no. Every kid makes it, and they just have these different teams.
Yes.
And basically that travel A team, travel B team, travel C team. So basically the travel team was so happy to take your money and then stick your kid on the bench of the bad travel team that plays other bad travel teams.
Right.
So that was the first thing I realized. Everyone makes it because they want to get as much money as possible. The other thing I realized was I listened to 3 or 4 parents just talk about how much they hated their lives and how they, all the travel and all the complaint and everything. And we've talked about this before, how a lot of parents will talk about this like they do not have a choice.
Right.
Like it's like paying their mortgage or something. Like, oh my goodness, I hate it, but what are you going to do?
Right.
So that was really interesting. And we decided that wasn't right for her. But what was so interesting to me was that nobody actually gets cut, but they still have a way of diverting the really talented kids.
Right.
Anyway.
Right. Yeah. So you still kind of have that leveling off, or the stacking kids by ability.
Sure.
Right?
It's a business.
Right.
It's a big business.
Right. So, so that was the second thing she talked about was status and had the stakes. And man, she said some really uncomfortable things, made me uncomfortable about how we just draw so much from the accomplishments of our kids. And it made me think a lot about, wow, that's really true in so many ways. So that was convicting. Yeah. So then, as we've already referenced, so many people see, so then she starts talking about college recruitment for sports. And so many people see athletics as a way to get college paid for or to get entrance into an elite school maybe you wouldn't otherwise. And listen, our oldest is fixing to go to college.
Yeah.
It's incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
I understand where people are coming from.
Yeah, and let's just pause here for a moment and say, I feel like that's the number one justification that is out there for kids playing sports like crazy and for parents spending a lot of money on their kids playing sports like crazy.
Right.
It's that it's almost like investing in the stock market. It's like, well, we're going to get it back.
We're going to get it back
when they get that full ride.
Exactly.
Yep.
So this is an interesting thing that that she observed from parents and the way that they think about college and how that drives athletics when the kids are younger. So she says these motives getting into college drive seriousness and excess on the sidelines and playing fields. To be good enough for a college team, kids have to start early and play often. They need the best coaches and the most competitive leagues at younger and younger ages. If these kids have any chance of making it to Brown or Alabama or Duke, they need to make the 3rd grade travel team. And down the road, they must show up at the right weekend tournaments and 3-day regattas put on by their travel teams, for it's at these showcase events where college coaches scout for future players, where all that sacrifice is expected to pay off. So that's kind of the thought process of so many people is, we get into this when they're younger, but then, one day it's going to pay off in that scholarship. And, she does talk about how, well, actually not many kids are awarded a scholarship. And even kids who are awarded a scholarship, very few of them are full ride. Generally, the full ride, she says, are saved for basketball and football. So anyway, that's kind of an interesting thing that she was talking about. So those are some of the things that she said have changed over time. And then she just talks about a few different issues that she brought up from youth sports, and one of them was the myth of character building. You know, we all say, hey, sports builds character, right? Like, isn't that a thing people say?
I feel like that's an absolute truth.
Okay. Well.
That's what I'm being facetious, but yeah, you hear that.
Right.
Like, hey, it's great to go out there and practice early and.
Well, and what she says is, yes, that's true. Kids make discoveries through sports. This is a quote, but what they absorb is entirely dependent on the context.
So really the better way to say it is sports can be character building.
Exactly.
But it's not a guarantee.
Well, and unfortunately, sports could build bad kinds of character.
Sure.
You know, it does just depend. So this is a quote from the book that I really thought was good. She says, one of the most pernicious myths that adults hold about sports is that they magically reveal a child's true character. According to this narrative, a boy who stares down a tough pitcher in the bottom of the ninth in a championship game shows that he's made of the right stuff. Strong, impervious to nerves, good in a foxhole. In fact, he's just demonstrated that he's capable in one particular kind of setting, in one particular game, which may or may not be transferable to the classroom, with family, or among friends. The reverse is also true. The kid who bobbles the ball in a close game or abandons a sport in frustration may be confident and dogged elsewhere. In truth, sports don't reveal a lot about what kind of person you are in the most important ways. So I think that is true. And, you know, because you think about the kids who aren't good at sports. Well, wow, maybe they're really good at something else, or they excel in these other things. Yeah. So we can get into a trap of thinking like sports is the main way that you can develop these things. Yeah. I think that's what she's saying.
And you mentioned as well that, you know, negative character traits that could be developed are like a hyper-competitiveness. And
cutthroat.
Yeah, whatever.
What would you say? Cutthroatedness.
Yeah, like what? Well, just like whatever I have to do to get a competitive advantage, I'm going to do.
Right.
The other thing I would say about character building is, I wonder if the real opportunity with sports and character building is in failure. Is watching our kids strike out, miss the and seeing that as an opportunity to then, you know, frame, okay, how do you respond to adversity?
Sure.
But, and difficult things in your life, but probably a lot of the myth of the character building is that the character building is happening through success. And that's why the number one goal is success.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. So she next moves to talking more deeply about parents and parents' role in their child's athletics endeavors. And she says parents' approach to and behavior around their children's sports are central to what kids pick up from them. So she makes the point that if we come home from games and what we say is, how many points did you get? Did you win? You know, how did you play? All this stuff. You know, what you're passing along is a desperation to be a winner, right? And an anxiety about your kids and where they stand in the field. So I thought that was really interesting.
And I got to say here, you know, I talked about we have a daughter that loves to play soccer. This is so easy. I've totally found myself many times saying, hey, you know, way to go with those goals. Or
right. That's what I'm saying. It stepped on my toes.
And you sort of have a box score evaluation of the game. Like, you know, how much did you fill up the stat sheet?
Totally.
Instead of just, hey, you competed hard. Something that just touched my heart the other day, our daughter, her team lost a soccer game and they lost it really bad. And after the game, I saw our daughter put her arm around another girl and just comfort her, who's a couple years younger than her. And I thought, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, that's the kind of thing I need to highlight more.
That's right. Not did you score the goals?
Yeah, yes. Exactly.
Yeah. So this, I think, will also step on your toes a little bit. So she says about parents, how we interact with sports. She says, on the one hand, we're saying sports are fun. Go learn about teamwork and discipline. While on the other, we were communicating this. We adults are here to make sure this all goes exactly to plan because athletic success matters deeply to us. When parents and other adults lionize the little jocks in their midst, they're contributing to the perception already widely held by most teenagers that athletes are at the top of the adolescent pecking order and by definition superior to the dorks in band or geeks in theater. This can't help but breed arrogance in kids, especially the more talented ones, who surely pick up on our elaborate contributions to their athletic success and understand how important they must be. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she's, just to be clear, like this woman loves sports. Her life has been built around running in a lot of ways. But she's saying, hey, there's a healthy way to be a sports parent, I put in quotes, and there's an unhealthy way. That's what she's saying.
Yeah.
So another couple things that she raised are, overtraining and early specialization really can lead to a lot of emotional harm.
Yeah, we've got to stop on this one for a minute. This one's really big because everything has gone majorly towards specialization, right?
Right. Yeah, and she spoke with a doctor named Neha Rakhar, I guess, who's a professor at the Mayo Clinic College of Medicine and Science. She calls early sports specialization an American public health disaster because they're seeing kids coming in for all kinds of surgeries and treatments and with injuries that are being caused by these kinds of specializations, like kids playing the same sport all year round, year after year.
Yeah. Yeah. And Bets, you shared with me before we went on the air some incredible athletes who grew up playing a lot of different sports and how that used to be the norm. So it used to be the norm that if you were a great football player, you didn't play football 12 months a year. If you were a great basketball player, maybe you still played pickup, or in the off season, but you didn't play competitively the time.
That's right. Yeah, she talked about how Roger Federer played several different sports until he played tennis in high school, and Tom Brady in high school played, I think she said, basketball and baseball and football. And Megan Rapinoe, she played several high school sports. So it's really interesting. Some of these athletes that we see be so dominant in a certain field actually played several up until they were, teens. So
and probably also just to protect kids from injuries, right?
Right.
Different surgeries that they might have to get if they specialize so much.
Right. So one other thing I just wanted to highlight, she talks about how, these very intense forms of playing sports can really lead to some psychological difficulties, and certainly not for every kid. Some kid weathers it all fine, and they handle the pressure fine and the demands on their time. But other kids struggle. And so one thing she brought up that I thought was really interesting was the athletic identity foreclosure. I bet you don't know what that means.
Not a clue.
Because I didn't. Okay, so this is what it is. She says, the winnowing of interests beyond sports and the narrowing of identity that follows can also unmoor young athletes. So saying like they're putting so much of their time into their sport that they don't have time or interest or energy to cultivate other interests. That's what she's saying. Adolescents who throw themselves into one sport think of themselves as a soccer player, a swimmer, a runner. Psychologists call this shrinking of self-concept athletic identity foreclosure. Even in its most benign form, this withering of experiences beyond athletics can make some kids oddly flat, their personalities stunted by their singular focus on a sport. So saying that, when you're so dedicated to one thing, you're missing out on opportunities to do other things like go camping with your family or do things on the weekend other than traveling and playing sports. And so that can be really difficult for kids eventually.
Yeah, it makes people one-dimensional.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So she just says, hey, look, sports at its best should be a vehicle for connection, right? For people connecting, for suffering together through these intense physical experiences, for just reaping the benefit of exercise, because she says over and over again, obviously, research has shown 10 bajillion times that exercise is good for us. We need to exercise. Yep. We need to move our bodies. Athletics are good for people. Being on a team is a good thing.
She wants to have a course correction. She's not looking to throw all sports out the window.
That's exactly it. Right. And she's saying being on a sports team, man, that can be a really powerful way to bond with other people. But she's saying the overly competitive, the overly intense, that's the stuff that can be more damaging. So then the question is, where do we go from here, right?
I've got 2 things. You've got more than 2.
Okay. So she gives several, and I won't highlight all of them. If this is something you're interested in, I would really recommend reading the book. But she just says, common sense things like, hey, look at your child, like look at them. Are they enjoying this? Would they be happy if a parent gave them permission to quit?
Isn't that funny to say that?
Yeah.
So a kid comes to the parent and says, I don't want to play sport anymore. And the parent says, you have to. It's kind of a funny way to think about it. Now, I can see times where you need to have the child keep pressing through, right? You want to quit because but what if the kid says to you 3 years in a row, I don't like what I'm doing?
Right. Well, and she talks about, the whole thing about sunk cost. When you've already put so much money and time and investment into something, it's hard to withdraw from it, right? Like
Sure.
You feel like, it's like when you read, this happens to me all the time. I get into a book, maybe I'm a fourth of the way through, and I'm like, I don't want to finish this book. But then I'm like, oh, but I really like checking things off of a checklist that say I did it. But it doesn't really make sense because I'd still be devoting a lot of time to finishing. But it's a sunk cost.
You should abandon the book.
I know. I do abandon it, but I feel the pain of what she's talking about. And so then a couple other things she says, just encourage your kids to play a variety of sports if they're interested, not just one. And another thing she talks about a lot that I didn't really mention is she talks about try to keep your family whole as much as possible, because the reality is, if there's one kiddo who's doing something that's very demanding of time, the other people in the family are bearing that cost. Mm-hmm. So she does talk about that too. And what I'll wrap up with is she says, strive to keep perspective. I love this. She says, when asked how they handled their children's sports, nearly every older parent I interviewed wished they knew then what they know now, that sports really don't matter. The way your kids play when they're young, whether they score or foul out or get named captain or awarded MVP, their performance doesn't make real difference. Their athletic success is unimportant. And I mean, maybe that's a bit of an overstatement. Like, that does develop part of who they are. So maybe that's a little bit of a simplification, but I think her point is, you're in your 40s, you played sports, you don't care how you did on those sports teams.
No.
And they have no bearing on your life at this point.
No.
Right.
I mean, I have some hobbies I enjoy doing on the side when I have time.
Right.
I mean,
but you did take good things from them, like, and this is one thing she says, like a lifelong commitment to fitness.
Absolutely.
So there are really good things that you take. So I think that might be a little bit of an oversimplification, but the point is learn to keep things in perspective.
Amen.
So did you have anything you want to say? What can parents do?
I've got 2 things. So first, as the preacher, I'll go to the Word. Mm-hmm. I'll go to the Bible.
Yep.
First 2 commandments. You shall have no other gods before you, and you shall have no idols.
Yeah.
Christian parents have to wrestle with, is this an idol? Mm-hmm. Have an idol is making, the typical definition you hear these days, it's generally making a good thing an ultimate thing. Mm-hmm. It can be making an evil thing an ultimate thing, but it's not, we still have people that think that idolatry means there's a statue in your house and you bow down to it. That's not how it works 99% of the time for people. Mm-hmm. People can make sports an idol. Mm-hmm. And if it's an idol, all of us need to repent of that and say, this isn't right. Lord, you are called to be number one in my life. Mm-hmm. You're called to be number one in my parenting. And I'm called to model that and show that to my kids. So the first thing I would say is, we have to all watch as Christians that we don't make sports an idol. Mm-hmm. And somebody might say, well, I'm not really worried about that. That's not a temptation, whatever. But it's like, look around. Our culture totally worships sports. Yeah. The Super Bowl is probably the closest thing we have to a religious holiday, like a nationwide religious holiday. And look, I'm going to go to the Super Bowl party every year too. Like, I'm not saying that we're denying the Lord when we go to a Super Bowl party, but like, we live in a culture that sports is huge. Mm-hmm. So the first thing I would say is, we're called to not make it an idol. And the second thing I would say is, I'm gonna go back to the 10 Commandments, and I'm gonna say, the command, honor the Sabbath, keep it holy. It's incredible how many Christians believe 9 out of 10 commandments and don't believe in the Sabbath. Mm. And there are Christians who believe that Jesus, basically they believe 1 out of the 10 doesn't apply to us anymore. Yeah. which is, I think that's kind of a funny view if you think about it. There's a lot of Christians I really respect. And we do believe that Jesus fulfilled all the commandments and he did fulfill the Sabbath. So therefore, it's not a legalistic thing. The Sabbath was made for man. It's for our good. It's for our enjoyment. But I just want to also say that, one of the things you wrote down here is miss some games.
Yeah.
If sports is causing us to be away from our church family an excessive amount, I don't think that's healthy for Christians.
Yeah.
And there's going to be Christians who disagree with me. They're going to say, I'm free in Christ. I can do whatever. It doesn't matter how often I'm at church. I don't get to heaven because of how often I go to church. Like, okay, that's all true.
Right.
It's all true. But the New Testament talks a lot about not using our freedom as an excuse for either sin or for not fulfilling the calling that we have as Christians to be with the body of Christ and so forth. So I think that's just something that parents need to wrestle with, is how often are we going to miss church? And I hope the whole Eric Little story from the 12 or whatever it is, Paris games where he wouldn't run on Sunday, I hope that doesn't just feel like this quaint little story that doesn't have any relevance to us. But to say, okay, well, how should we wrestle with the calling that we know we have to be with our church family on the Lord's Day?
Well, and one more thing I would say too is not just in sports, but for those of us who are parents or grandparents, there are so many ways that we can be anxious about our kids and try to do things to control their outcome, right? Like we can try to say, if we put this in, then this will come of it. And I think the calling for the Christian is to say, hey, I trust God with my child, and maybe that means I'm going to make choices that look different than what other people are going to make, but we trust that God is taking care of them, that God is writing their story. And so we don't have to be anxious that if they miss out on certain things, there's going to be a bad outcome, right?
Absolutely. We can trust, and we're certainly not against Christian kids going to play college, professional. I mean, hey, that's awesome that the Lord, and I know he does that. I know there are strong Christians in college, all kinds of college athletics and professional sports as well.
Sure.
We praise God for that. But this is an issue that Christians need to think hard about. All right. The name of the book is Take Back the Game. Check it out. And thanks for joining us for another episode of Intersect. Please hit the bell, subscribe. We would appreciate that. And we will see you next time.